Hey guys, welcome back to Star Wars Timeline. I'm your host, Ben. Today, I'm honored to invite Claudia Gray. Claudia Gray is a popular author. She's known for young adult fiction, best known for Evernight, Constellation, Firebird, and of course, this little franchise we're here all to talk about, Star Wars. She has also written for comic books such as DC. Claudia, it's very nice to have you. How are you doing today?
I am doing really well. I've got a lot of writing to do, but it's actually getting done. So, okay.
Keeping busy is fun, right? On one hand, you
Yes.
want to drop everything and run to some beach. On the other hand, it's like, oh my God, more work coming in. I'm excited.
Yeah, the weather is that exact stage of beauty that makes you not want to be inside. So, I've been writing outside, which works.
It's very nice. I
Yeah.
like to ask all of my interviewees some general questions about their career paths and so forth. I wanted to
Okay.
know when was the first time you knew that you wanted a career in writing, actually?
It's interesting that you worded it that way because most people say, like, when did you know you wanted to be a writer? And that was always, but the question of when I knew, like, no, I want to pursue this, I actually want to do it, I want to make it my work, that came a lot later. I got published with Evernight. In some ways, I think I was not ready, and the book was not ready, but I kind of got my chance and had to jump on it. But as late as getting that published, a friend of mine reminded me of this. I was telling her, I was like, "There's no way that I'd ever be able to do that as my only job. That would be impossible." And I think it was 3 years later that I went full time and have been doing that ever since. It is, it's the most wonderful job I've ever had or could consider having. It does involve some certain uncertainties. I've
Hmm.
never been like, I could definitely do this for the rest of my life. I always just know, well, I can probably support myself for another 2 years. And I never know any farther out than that. But it always, I keep pushing the 2 years forward over
Yeah.
and over again.
And I phrased this question specifically so because, when I was in art school here in New York City, School of Visual
Mhm.
Arts, it's one thing to have a passion for something. I'm going to be an animator, and an entirely
Mhm.
different thing pursuing your career through the grind, through the tough moments, and really pushing through until Eureka, and you blow up, you're popular, you have your fandom, and people actually get to enjoy and buy your work. Um,
Yeah, and I mean, and to be fair, it's not only, I don't want to make it sound like, oh, you just got to have the grit, because there are a lot of other things that play into it.
of course.
Some people discover that they really do need to work in an office environment. They need other people around them
Hmm.
for productivity, or the uncertainty of exactly how much you're getting paid and when it's happening. That is not for everybody.
Hmm.
I honestly feel it's not for me either, but I've decided to stick with it. There are a lot of really valid reasons why your passion may not be the right fit for you as a career. People just have different needs.
Hmm.
And I've been lucky enough to have this suit mine.
Yeah, I think I state the obvious when I say with such a globally renowned IP as Star Wars, I mean the expectations and the motivation to do well is just staggering. It's so much. But did you have, as earlier in your pathway to writing, did you have like an iconic author or maybe a school teacher who inspired you?
Um, I can't say there's any one thing. I'm a really avid reader, so it's very hard to go like, oh, it was this book,
Hmm.
because it's all of them really. Um, not, I mean, again, I had great teachers, but there was nobody going, you should be pursuing this.
Mm.
That was just not something that at my small school anybody was getting pushed to do. But I knew from a very early age that I was very much in love with stories, and I had my favorite books and TV shows and movies, and I was
So,
hugely engaged with them. Star Wars was one of the first
mhm,
truly mind-bending experiences that I had.
yeah. Uh, would you say I mentioned earlier some of obviously your own work before you got to Star Wars?
Mhm.
You're already a published author. What would you say are some of the differences between crafting your own story and being the boss of your own universe versus writing for something like Star Wars?
Yeah. Um, I mean, your own stuff, ultimately you're God in the machine, and that is really great.
Mhm.
And Star Wars, even though I've had great experiences, every once in a while you have a really great idea and you can't do it because some other project that you don't even know what it is going to be on that territory.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, this is only a little thing, but even after I'd done some Star Wars, I had this one idea for a little children's book, which is not something I've ever written. But I remember explaining to the head of Star Wars Publishing, and this was obviously a few years ago, I was like, it's Yoda teaching baby Yaddle. Think about how cute that would be. And he kept going, ah. And I was like, how does he not see that this is gold? And then a couple months later, The Mandalorian debuts. I was like, oh, they were on it. They were on
Yeah.
it. So, you have all these other people out there that are working in the same field, and everybody's trying to work around everybody else. And to be really frank, if you're in publishing, you're going to be asked to give way to TV and movies every single time.
Right.
Uh, so there's that. But on the other hand, there are things like I need a spaceship that is roughly X size, et cetera. Not only does that already exist, there may be blueprints, there may
Mhm.
be fantastic art that's been developed by literally some of the world's greatest designers have been working on this for almost half a century.
Mhm.
So there's this enormous wealth of lore and design and art and story that you get to draw from. And when you're doing your own stuff, you got to figure out how the spaceship works. So
Yeah.
there are definite pros and cons to each.
Yeah. And one compliment I'd like to get, I hope it comes through as a compliment, guys. When I got introduced to you, which we're going to talk about next, Star Wars literature, and what's was absolutely phenomenal is me as a reader, recognize your prose style, your particular accents on characters, what you want to do.
Mm.
But at the same time, I didn't read Claudia Gray, if that makes any sense. I was reading a Star, and I was so engrossed in the characters and the story that nothing else matters. For the time duration, I read Lost Stars maybe in a day or two. I couldn't get off it. And that gave me such a great feeling. And that's actually the first book that I wanted to speak with you about. How did this concept come about? Was it something that Disney and Del Rey pitched to you, like, hey, why don't we weave a story that takes place during the times of the original trilogy? Or was it something that was of your design?
Well, it was Skywalker Press, not Del Rey. But what
Oh,
they
okay.
came to me with was, they just said, do you want to write something? Of course I did want to write a young adult book for Star Wars. And I thought, they'll give me this whole outline and expect me to write it. And they didn't. Or rather, they did give me an outline, but they were like, oh, this is an idea that we have, of
Hmm.
which I retained nothing.
Hmm.
The book just, that wasn't the way that I saw the story going at all. But again, they weren't insisting on that. What they
Right.
wanted was just two childhood friends who retain a bond despite winding up on opposite sides of the war. And originally they were like, we want this young idealistic girl in the rebellion
Hmm.
and this angry, stormy guy in the empire. And what they had given me very much had that. And I was just like, so I said, what if the idealistic girls in the empire and the angry dudes in the rebellion? And they said, okay. And from there, I got to really build it from, the ground up. And all I had to do was weave through the events of the original trilogy. And I tried to do it in a way that would make it clear, like you wanted it to feel like, yes, Thane and Sina would be there. That is a natural place for them to be,
Hmm.
not quite as Forrest Gumpy, as just
Yeah.
these random encounters. But by giving them each kind of a path, you could weave them into these places and events that we had seen before.
Yeah.
And beyond that, it was just taking the universe and saying, what is it like if you're not the big hero or the main villain and nobody has sat you down and gave you the master plan? You're not going to fire the final shot. What is it like if you are just an average working pilot, or you are a ground level conscript for the rebellion, or
Hmm.
you're a regular imperial officer who, like, what are they telling you? How much do
Hmm.
you understand of what's going on? I mean, at first when Rogue One came out, I was a little bit concerned. It was like, oh, they had actually, used the Death Star before with these miniature things. How would Ciena not have known this? But then I thought about it and it was like, a Star Destroyer, the size of that thing, I mean, a dreadnought is supposed to be roughly the size of Russia,
Hmm.
you know, and a Star Destroyer, though not that big, I mean, it's supposed to be like a good chunk of Manhattan, right?
Hmm.
There's a really great video online that visualizes this that if you can find is
I never saw it,
fantastic.
actually.
It was like, and I used to live in Manhattan,
Hmm.
and I could tell you, very early in my time there, I found out the St. Patrick's Day parade had been 2 blocks from where I was working. Millions of people had congregated. I knew nothing. I saw nothing of it,
Yeah.
and I was like, it would be entirely impossible to be in a Star Destroyer and not know that that was happening.
Yeah. I remember in 2014, right, when obviously Lucasfilm and Disney, they kind of like made this huge announcement that 40-year rich history of Star Wars is going to be rebranded. It's over here on the side, here it's Legends, and now we're going to have a new take at it. Obviously, a lot of fans were nervous. I was one of the fans who was like, let's go, man. Let's see what's going on there. And to solidify my interest in literature, because to me, when it comes to Star Wars mediums, books are always first. You never get as much rich detail as you do in the movies or video games. And when I read the book, I said, yeah, I'm on board. I'm Claudia Gray fan. I'm on board with new books. I'm sold. Whatever else is going to come out, I'm going to at the very least check it out. And it was so seamless how you moved between scenes that are happening in the original trilogy. And I would make the argument that Thane and Cena, they are heroes of the adventure. They are not Luke Skywalker, but it solidified the idea that you could tell a heroic journey without the Skywalker tag attached to it. And I wanted to know what inspired these two characters. Did you have like actual prototypes that you kind of like wrote off of real life people that you encountered?
No, nothing like that. The original idea that Star Wars themselves had with the angry dude and the idealistic young girl, they're saying like it's like Rolf and Liesel from The Sound of Music. And I was like, the big problem with that is nobody likes Rolf. Nobody's ever gonna like Rolf. Rolf sucks. That is the whole message of The Sound of Music. Nazis bad, Rolf sucks.
Yeah.
And also lederhosen can be made of curtains. But so I wanted a different template for that. And the whole idea of having an idealistic person in the Empire and an angry guy in the Rebellion, it gives you a place to start building character. Somebody who's, really got a very pure heart who winds up working for the Empire is going to be somebody who trusts the state, who believes in authority, who believes in duty and loyalty and keeping her word and her oath. Like those are going to be things that would lead you down that path. They're all good qualities, but that's what gets used against her. And really, I mean, that's the most insidious evil, is not the evil that works on the bad in you. It's the evil that takes the good in you and twists it.
Yeah, I know a score of Star Wars fans who are so enamored with the idea of introducing shades of gray into a Star Wars template. And obviously, we see a lot of that in The Lost Stars. Are you the type of, speaking from the fan perspective, Claudia, as a Star Wars fan, do you prefer these clear-cut good versus evil stories where everything is very focused, or sort of shades of gray where even the villains have some kind of like motivations that you can empathize with?
I mean, let's put it this way. You want moral shadings, but you also want some areas of absolute black and absolute white. Like, for instance, Andor that we recently got, I thought did this amazingly well.
Agreed.
And also, I have not been able to talk about anything but Andor for the past 6 months, so just be prepared. But you had a lot of ambiguous moments with Andor himself. What is Cyril Karn exactly? What is going on with that guy? On the one hand, he's this power-hungry zealot, but on the other hand, he genuinely wants to find out why these two people got killed. He doesn't want to blow that off. You wind up rooting a little bit for Dedra Meero at first, just because she's actually competent and she's smart, and you recognize that she's up against a machine. And then you see more of what she's doing. You're like, oh, no, this is not a good person. I thought they did a really great job of showing these different gradations of gray, while still having, the absolute wrongness of what is done to Bix.
Yeah, I was ecstatic about it, man, when the
Yeah,
show came out.
Yeah, the absolute, goodness of Marva's saving Cassian, or Brasso just being there for B2 emo instead of going, this, who cares if this droid is sad, I thought that was really beautifully done. So what I would say is you need the whole spectrum. I think it can be a lot more gray than, say, the original A New Hope is.
Right.
But I think if you make it all morally gray in sort of the style of like a John le Carré or something like this, that you are losing a little bit of the flavor. I think you need the entire gamut.
And speaking of characters, which I would personally classify somebody who is absolute representation of goodness and purity, is Leia. And that's actually the next book I wanted to speak with you about. Again, right. I was captivated by it from start. I don't care if it's young adult book. If it has a Star Wars label on it, I'm at least going to check it out. She was my Star Wars hero. I saw Star Wars originally in Russia as a kid in the 80s with Russian dubbing. I'm like, you didn't separate. Here's Han, here's Leia, and they're all heroes and you love them all. And, the novel explores Leia's teenage years before the entire burden of this war of the galaxy falls on her shoulders. How did you balance writing both for younger demographic, but also keeping the adult audience interested?
It's interesting. I mean, right before Lost Stars came out, there were some skeptics online who were saying things like, I don't need any young adult in my Star Wars. And I was like, I have bad news for you about the movies.
They are for kids.
Yeah, well, that, and also, I mean, A New Hope is about Leia and Luke, who are still teenagers at that point, being thrown out of their homes and having to take over as the heroes in their own right. That's a big element of the story, particularly Luke's. The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones do this with Padme and then with Anakin as well. Star Wars has always had a really strong footprint in young adult. The Force Awakens also. The Rogue One, that is fundamental to this because it is rooted in these mythological tropes, and the coming of age experience is a big part of a lot of these mythological tropes. So that's the first thing. I just don't think it's a reach at all. If you as an adult are into Star Wars, by definition, almost, you can be into the young adult perspective in Star Wars. It's just a matter of framing it within the whole thing. And it was interesting to ask questions about the early rebellion. I outlined Princess of Alderaan before I saw Rogue One, but wrote it after. And that was really exciting to me. Again, another reason why I really loved Andor, getting into this period of time where, it isn't this standing army where everybody has this recognition that, of course, we're going to go into military combat up against the Imperial Starfleet, which has literal trillions of people in it. And again, ships the size of Russia. You're not going to have that. How far are you going to go? What are the steps you're going to take? What are you willing to bring down on yourself, on your planet, on all these people that agree with you? It was really interesting to look at that and also the morality of it, because Leia, this is a fight that's going to kill trillions of people, and Leia doesn't know it yet, but it's going to destroy her planet. She knows it's going to destroy a lot of people. And she realized to say, like, am I okay with doing that? Like, how, what is the evil that you're up against that's worth saying, like, yes, I will endanger and lose this many lives through my actions? Ultimately, the Empire is that level of evil, but it's not as simple as going, they're bad, as anybody on Alderaan could tell you if they were here to tell us, which they are not.
In a way, it was almost like a little Buddha coming out of his kingdom and being innocent, childhood is lost, and you're exposed to reality. And same with Leia. This is innocent, naive youth, and now she's exposed to all of these things that are happening within the novel. They kind of shape her mind in order to prepare her for the future. I was really enjoying how eloquently you tackled between the traditional values that Leia has for like looking for a suitor. What space am I going to occupy socially in my, world, aside from my personal needs, what I want as a woman, as a person. And then also shifting back to that, to the personal I, to the self, satisfaction. And I wanted to ask you next is, what do you think makes a powerful female archetype today? And is there a difference between today versus 1977?
I mean, there is a difference between today versus 1977, I think. Leia is fantastic because it takes the damsel in distress thing and turns it on its head. The minute they get that door open for her, she's in charge, she's shooting, she's helping them get their way out of there. She's the one who knows the big master plan that has to unfold, which is terrific. Honestly, I don't feel like there's that much difference between creating a great female archetype and creating a great male archetype. It's the same things make a character strong and compelling, right. I believe. It's just we're kind of used to seeing, even in Star Wars, a more edited version of the female experience. Rey's the first female lead character in a Star Wars movie who isn't a princess or a queen.
Right.
Yeah. So that changes things. I mean, you just want somebody who is dynamic, who is there in the action, making things happen. Like with the book Bloodline, what they suggested first was this purely political thing, which, and it is a big political thriller. But I also like to be verbatim, the first thing that I said to them when I looked at it was like, she's got to blow some shit up.
That's awesome.
It was like, no, I want her out there. This is not a character who just sits behind a desk. This is a very active person. And so the whole thing with Hutt Slayer and the Nikto, et cetera, comes out of that. It was like, no, I also want to have her being very active, very dynamic. This is, she's not a shrinking violet. That's not who it is. I think it's a matter of looking for that and just not getting into one of the tropes that we really have for female characters, or if you're going there, like to do so thoughtfully and with intention and in a way that's actually three-dimensional.
Right. Yeah, excellent, fantastic points. I adore just listening to you and hearing the analysis of the actual creator who wrote this character in the context of this book. And once again, I really, really enjoyed it. And I love the point that you bring up that it's not the fact that you have a female character, it's their personality and that arc, right, where they begin and where they end, that truly should take hold of a reader's imagination. That's what really inspires a story.
Yeah, you do have, some readers you can't control. I've never quite gotten over. There was some review of Bloodline online, and this guy had liked it more than not. But he said, you have to understand, of course, that this is all females and there's the token male sometimes comes along.
Right.
And I counted, there are 11 characters in Bloodline that have significant points of view. 6 of them are female and 5 are male. And by far the larger supporting role after Leia is Ransom Casterfo, who's male. And that was this guy's thing that was his idea of a token male once in a while, was a nearly 50-50 split.
To give you my perspective, when I picked up the book, I sort of look at, okay, this is young adult readers. So I just want to kind of gauge what sort of language complexity it's going to have, because the impact of the story is going to be the same. I love Kevin J. Anderson's and Reckham West's Young Jedi Knight series. They're absolutely glamorous. So when I was reading this, I'm like, okay, so who is the demographic of this book? I imagine this is written for young adult or teenage or preteen females who adore Leia. Of course, boys as well. You're just going to pick it up and read it. And when you read it, I'm like, of course it's going to be female leads. Duh. Like I really enjoy when you focus and home in that story on a specific demographic with enough open doors for anybody to come in and enjoy. We all, right?
This is the thing. It's the idea that guys would not respond to a female lead character. There's
Yeah.
no expectation that women won't watch male lead characters. There's none
Yeah.
of this, and I do feel like that is breaking down bit by bit, over time. But you hope that little boys see Leia as a hero too.
Yeah.
You want that. You should. She is.
Claudia, guys, speaking of politics, our next book. Okay. I just want to bring up the amazing, absolutely badass cover that this book has. I love every time I do like a Legends or a new canon book, I just spent a second in the beginning to highlight the amazing art. Man, if you are going to say that covers don't sell the books, they kind of do. So I was like, what is this? And immediately, I'm in there. Fantastic cover, fantastic book. Guys, Master and Apprentice. I never realized, I was kind of on the fence about the prequels. They were not my thing for many, many years. It's very difficult for me to digest. But I never realized I would miss Qui-Gon Jinn until this came out. Mm-hmm. And how excited were you developing a new story for two arguably some of the most beloved Star Wars characters ever?
Yeah, I had been asking to write Qui-Gon ever since I'd written Lost Stars. I've bothered them about it for a while.
Yeah.
And I always really enjoyed The Phantom Menace. And sometimes, I would say even that I enjoyed it more than Revenge of the Sith, even though Revenge of the Sith is objectively a better movie.
Right.
But it was just that I loved that character so much. And I felt like, by the time of the prequels, the Jedi Order has lost its way a little bit. They've become a little bit too hierarchical and rule bound, and they really are just kind of doing what the Republic says do. And you feel like the mysticism is lost. Yoda doesn't say one wise or profound thing throughout the entire prequels, not even once. He's this bureaucrat. Yoda had lost himself to some degree, but you felt just really through Liam Neeson's performance that Qui-Gon Jinn was a Jedi who was still very much connected to that. And that was something that pulled me in very strongly. Mm-hmm. I wanted to see what it was like for him, and particularly in a time where maybe the Jedi Order isn't there with him, philosophically, I guess. And it was actually very difficult to come up with the story. And because I finally figured it out, I was like, what I want to do is write a 5-volume biography of Qui-Gon Jinn. I want to tell all the Qui-Gon stories. And Disney Publishing was like, please pick one. And so then I was like, okay, fundamentally, what is the fundamental thing you have to understand about Qui-Gon? What's the number one question? And it is, why does he believe in those prophecies when nobody else does? Because if he doesn't believe in them, there is no story. Right. The Phantom Menace doesn't unfold the way that it does, and everything changes. Mm-hmm. So, okay, why? Why does he believe that? Even Yoda is going like, those are old tales. What is that? Nobody knows the future for real. And it was great to say, okay, here's a story that will bring that out, that will explain why he believes this and why he has this faith. And it allowed me to play with the idea of the Master and Apprentice in two ways. On one thing, you have him and Obi-Wan, who is, a little more methodical, and, he's not as much of a free spirit, I guess.
A straight arrow, we would say, right?
He is a straight arrow, which isn't to say that he isn't his own person. He is. But, I don't feel like he's just this automaton of the Republic by any means. But he's somebody who's really looking for the meaning within the rules. And Qui-Gon, meanwhile, is coloring outside the lines.
Yeah.
So I got to play with that. But then I also got to have Qui-Gon as the apprentice and Dooku as the master. Mm-hmm. And I happened to be working on that at the same time that Kevin Scott was writing the audio drama Dooku Jedi Lost.
Oh, it's amazing.
So, yeah, we were able to sort of decide together, like, oh, let's have Dooku and Qui-Gon be here. And I came up with Rael Averross, and Kevin worked him into the audio drama. And I was like, how dare you write better Rael dialogue than me? And we wanted to sort of build a cohesive background for Dooku and and Qui-Gon, and we got to do that. So even though it was a lot of a process, sort of weeding through all the infinite possibilities, we did get there in the end.
You know what really fascinated me is we did get expanded universe novels dealing with a Jedi duet, a master and apprentice, and the relationship between the two. We did have that in video games like Knights of the Republic, particularly Part 2 Sith Lords, where you have your player-made character interact with this Jedi Master Kreia, who you don't quite know what it is, but there's a lot of dialogue, a lot of not only Jedi code, but how they relate to one another as individuals. My next question is, the reason that this is one of my favorite Star Wars books, and I've been reading them for like over 20 years, is because there's not only a pair of the Jedi and the depth that you go into. There's three. There's Master Yoda and Dooku, there's Dooku and Qui-Gon, and there's Qui-Gon and Kenobi. Was it an intentional choice to draw this narrative parallel between the three and combine these couples?
Yeah, I mean, least was Yoda and Dooku just for reasons, at least with my stuff. But yeah, you wanted to show the continuity, and you know, Dooku, very different person from Qui-Gon, but somebody who was also an iconoclast in his way.
Right.
He was very much his own person, even within the Order. You knew that. I mean, he wouldn't have wound up leaving the Order, becoming, you know, the leader of Sereno without that. So that was interesting to me to go, okay, because of this, that leads Qui-Gon to, you know, to develop as a character who isn't quite in step with the rest of the Order, even if it's a little different. And of course, then you have Obi-Wan, who is in step with the rest of the Order, at least in most respects, but does retain, I think, this real bedrock centeredness that I feel like some of the Jedi by the time of the Clone Wars are missing. Sorry, that was kind of a wandering answer.
No, it's awesome. You know, it's almost in a way where the fun begins is where you have an understanding what the Jedi code entails and what the ideal Jedi should be. But the fun of the story is where all the human flaws emerge and all of these contrasts and things and motivations and personal stresses, you know, and worries that they have, which humanizes them all. It makes you wonder, like, as I was reading the novel as a fan, I'm thinking to myself, man, how differently their destinies could have been if they made this particular choice during their journey, or that particular choice. And it just activates all these different ideas. And as you're reading the novel, you're like branching off in these all directions. I'm like, oh, man. Yeah, so when is the next Claudia Gray book? I know I sound like I'm pampering you, but honestly, with all sincerity, I mean it. I was just blown away, man. It was such an excellent book.
I'm so glad you enjoyed it. It really was. Like I said in the beginning, I was a little nervous. It was like, which story do I tell? So I'm always a little bit relieved to hear this.
And I was thinking, like, you know what? Benjamin, me, who kind of like grew around accepting the Star Wars prequel trilogy, I can't wait to see how the fans of the trilogy are going to react to it. Kids who grew up with this trilogy, Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, they're just going to blow up. The next thing that happened in the Star Wars canon publishing campaign just blew my mind. I had a very, as I'm sure all of us, you, other fans, different generations, different parts of the world, we internalized the original Star Wars trilogy or whatever you came in, and you kind of like fulfilled the rest of this fantasy with your own personal imagination, with the information that wasn't provided for us. And here comes Project Luminous, the High Republic. I was completely swept away for one reason alone. It represented the Jedi in light, the way they imagined them as a kid. Not these space police guys who are running around, who, like you said, have completely lost their way and became bureaucrats, but these noble guardians of peace, which are not bound to, like, we can't have relationships, like, you know, these, like, almost automatons. I mean, look at Mace Windu. He's like, oh, the Jedi Code states, Anakin, you know. Here, it's vastly, vastly different, much more liberal, much more fringe, like, Wild West explorers. What would you say? And once again, obviously, it's you and other amazing authors, Kevin Scott, you know, and Charles Soule and the rest of them, Justina Ireland. What would you say were some of the unique challenges developing this new branch of the story for Star Wars?
Well, I mean, you know, just coming up, first of all, like, where to begin When you're given that much license, all of a sudden you're like, where do we put this? When do we put this?
Yeah.
But envisioning the Jedi Order as what Ben Kenobi described them as in A New Hope, the guardians of peace and justice throughout the galaxy. It was like, okay, where do we start from that? One thing that was a big touchstone for me personally, I had been to comics. I was working also on my House of L trilogy at the time, and I had gone to sort of a comic seminar with Grant Morrison, and he was talking about writing Superman. And he had realized one of the key things about Superman was Superman ought to be utterly relaxed. Like his body language is 100% confident, 0% on guard, pretty much the whole time, because nothing can hurt him. He is that safe. And we realized the Jedi needed to have a little bit of that. I mean, not obviously to Superman level, but these are people who are very fundamentally sure of their abilities. The galaxy has been without a massive interstellar war for generations. There's going to be the much greater sense of freedom and safety and security, and with that comes a little bit of, I guess you could call it, swashbuckling flair to it.
Definitely has that.
Yeah, so we thought the Jedi Order would be less centralized. You still, of course, have the Coruscant Temple as the main temple, but there are others, and not all of them touch base with the Central Temple as much. There's not one correct way to be a Jedi. It's understood that people do things a little differently, that the right path for one person may not be the right path for the other, or that the Force might call on an individual to do something even away from the Order for a time. We liked having that sense about it, that it wasn't as caught up in dogma and doctrine, that it was more mystical, I guess is what I'm saying.
That definitely comes through.
Yeah, it was something that was arising, not just from one principle of the Order, but from every Jedi. Every Jedi is responsible for fulfilling the Force in their own best way, and it adds to this huge, the huge tapestry that they're all woven together with.
Guys, we're gonna start wrapping up soon because I've written about a 500,000 other questions, but Claudia is on a time clock here. One last question in regards to the iRepublic. There's so many great new Jedi characters. There's Belzadifar, there's Loden Greatstorm, there's Avar Kriss. But my personal favorite is this very, very eccentric guy, this Geode. How did you come up with such a solid character, and you stick by him, and you're just so unapologetic with him? In every book, it just hits home every single time.
Geode came about because originally I'd come up with Leox, and I knew I wanted a pilot who, if you were playing Knights of the Old Republic, this character would be a scoundrel. But I didn't want it to be, Han Solo, diet Han Solo. It had to be that energy, but different. And something brought up the idea of sort of Matthew McConaughey and like his 1990s naked bongo playing era, but for those of us who remember that. And I was like, that's perfect. That's exactly the kind of energy that I'd like. It's not Han Solo, but it is very rascally.
And he's just there, and you don't know how he moves from scene to scene. He just ends up here, but he's saving somebody. You just gotta get there.
Yeah. Oh, and Leox just needed a co-pilot that wasn't going to talk a lot, because Leox was going to talk a lot.
Yeah.
And I was like, but it can't be Chewbacca, light either. And my husband just offhand was like, what if it was a rock? And I was like, oh, wait. Now, of course, he is not a rock. He is a being that is very difficult to tell from a rock.
Yeah.
But and that got to be the comic relief in a way. And of course, there have always been comic characters in Star Wars, but the fun of it was realizing how many ways there are in the English language to describe somebody's reaction or action or statement that doesn't actually describe that per se. It's all these little verbal phrases and shortcuts that we have. It's like, oh, that's how you do this character, so that you have a really full sense of him reacting to things and his personality, even though you never actually see him move or hear him speak. And that turned out to be a lot of fun. I actually heard from the French translator for the books, and she said it was really both fun and challenging because she couldn't just verbatim translate what I was saying.
Right.
She had to find the phrases in French that do that exact same thing and describe it in those ways. So I'm thrilled that you love him and that so much of the readership got behind him. Last Celebration, I remember I was just like, I just want one Geode cosplayer, just one. And there were 3. So
I mean, just come on. It's like, we have become so spoiled with such rich and diverse content that's being barraged at us from every corner, from Disney streaming service, from the books and video games. So much stuff has been coming out. It's you got to have some fun with it. You have to have some playfulness. Claudia, we're going to start wrapping up things here. Once again, thank you kindly for all of your time. I enjoy all of your books. I'll continue reviewing them on the channel here. For those of my readers who enjoy my reviews when I do Legends books, when I do canon books, what is your final message to longtime and new Star Wars book fans, and what do you hope them to get out of your books?
Oh man, I mean, the main thing I hope is just that people feel fundamentally like this is Star Wars, that they are getting more of Star Wars, not just something over to the side, like that you're getting something about the story that is vital and interesting and fun and makes you feel like this really belongs as part of this overarching story. This counts, I guess.
Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful because I can absolutely sympathize with a lot of fans who felt like distressed, that their favorite stories didn't get to continue. But I always try to encourage fans to keep an open mind and open this new chapter, because if you think of it as something like DC or Marvel, like 2 things could exist in parallel universes, I would say that some of the richest content exists in canon now, and largely due to your books. They're just freaking awesome. I really appreciate your talent. I appreciate all the hard work you're doing for Star Wars. Thank you so much. Guys, I'm going to drop all the... Sure, it's been a delight. Thank you so much. Guys, I'm going to drop all Claudia's links in the video description below. I'll drop the links to all the books. If you're interested in checking them out, links straight to Amazon or something like that, go check them out. Thanks a lot for watching it, guys. We'll catch you next time. Take care, everyone.